Hello, everyone. Welcome to SWA Conf, also known as Static Web Apps Conference. I'm so excited. I love Static Web Apps. I am so excited to learn more about it today. We have some amazing guests that are going to be joining us. But first, we have a quick little video montage to get us started. Take it away.
Hey friends.
Hello folks.
Hello.
I've been writing documentation, writing tutorials for how to deploy an Azure Static Web App.
I focus on marketing for static web apps.
I worked on the user experience in the Azure portal.
I work on the core platform infrastructure, bringing new features.
And I get to help bring you the docs for Azure Static Web Apps.
I worked on the core infrastructure of Static Web Apps on features ranging from custom domains to the coordination of content deployments.
I help write documentation for Static Web Apps and just generally bug the engineering team with really bad questions about how to use it. Welcome.
Wow, Burke. Asking questions of engineering teams and bugging them is one of my favorite pastimes as well. Welcome to the show, y'all. Hi, I'm Chloe Condon, Senior Cloud Advocate here at Microsoft. It's bright and early here in Oakland, California. I'm drinking my coffee. Let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. I know we have folks all over the world joining us today here to learn about static web apps from the experts. We have people who actually work on the tools, on all the pieces of this product that make it move and work. And I am so excited to introduce them all to you. But before we do that, we have a little bit of housekeeping here. So first, we want to share our code of conduct, which is probably the most important part of this event. We really want to make sure that everyone is friendly, welcoming, patient, respectful, and inclusive, thoughtful, and remain open and curious during this event. Really what we want is for everyone to have a good time here, be kind to each other. So please, please, please make sure that you review our code of conduct. We will also have folks monitoring the chat. So also make sure that you put your questions in the chat. I think the best part about online events is we don't have to wait until the end and line up to see the speaker to ask all our questions. We can actually ask them during the talk. So you don't have to forget any questions. All of our questions we're going to be able to answer afterwards. So definitely make sure that you're joining us at aka.ms/learntv, or you can join us at aka.ms/SWAconf, and you will be able to join the party live. How fun is that? So we are also super, super excited to be launching this Static Web Apps Cloud Skills Challenge. Woo! Check out the link in chat, and you'll be able to complete Learn modules and Microsoft Learn for 30 days for your Azure Heroes badge. I'm all about getting all the badges. I'm very much into gamification, so I think I'm going to have to do this Cloud Skills Challenge, y'all. And you can check that out at aka.ms/SWA-challenge. And I highly recommend doing that. It's a great way to not only check your skills after learning all the things during this event, but just solidify it in your brain and get a cool badge. That's pretty cool, right? Also, we are going to have all of these sessions online and available on demand. Let's take a look at that agenda, though, because we have some pretty cool heavy hitters that are going to be talking to us about static web apps today. We, of course, are kicking things off with our keynote with John Papa. Then we're going to be talking to Wasim later, have a little look at the static web app CLI. Daria is going to be telling us about the production API. And then later, we're going to have a presentation from Ohad, talking about fantastic websites and how to deploy them. Ooh, I love that. I hope that's a Harry Potter reference that I just caught while I was saying it out loud. We also have DevOps for static web apps in the real world with the incredible April Edwards. And of course, end-to-end testing with Playwright with Mandy and Arjan. I'm so excited, y'all. I don't know about you, but it can be a lot for me to just like sit through an entire event. So I've got my coffee here. I've got my snacks. Go get everything that you need because we're about to get this party started. We have so much to cover today, and I hope you're here with us for the whole day. Again, we are taking questions live on Learn TV. So any questions that you have about what's being talked about, any questions about how to get started, the documentation, check it out at aka.ms/learntv. And all sessions will be available on demand. So if you need to go pick up your kids from daycare, if you need to take a little nap, if you need a lunch break, don't worry, we're going to have all the content waiting for you, or coming soon to you in the next couple of days. So, but join us live. It's way more fun. You could ask questions, get to interact with the community here. So have a seat, get comfy, and now we are going to introduce our first speaker. I'm so excited. We have such a wonderful keynote today. Today, we have John Papa. Now, John worked for Disney for many years, contributed to many of the web apps and the experiences you've interacted with for Disney. I'm such a Disney fan myself, so I'm fangirling right now. He's here to tell us more about the journey from server to the static web. Welcome to Static Web Apps Conference, John Papa. How are you doing, John? Oh, you are muted. Classic. This is like perfect start. We love this.
The online web, right? We're all getting used to it. How are you doing, Chloe?
I'm doing good. You know, I watched some Loki last night, speaking of Disney. I think I've become even more of a Disney fan during the pandemic. But John, I have a Disney memory to share with you, because you're talking today all about, you know, the history of how we got here. And I think one of the first websites I ever visited was a 101 Dalmatians live action starring Glenn Close static web page about the movie. Any chance you worked on that?
Not specifically, no, but there's probably a very good likelihood that some of the code that some of us touched, such as myself, is actually being used in some of those pages for the movies that are out there.
Back in the days of AOL, I spent a majority of my time on Disney websites, so thank you for providing me with entertainment as a youth.
AOL, awesome.
Got to get around those parental controls. Anyway, John, I am so excited for this keynote. I will let you take it away because I know we have a lot to cover, but if you have any Disney questions for John, put them in the chat, y'all. We'll cover them after. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, everybody, for coming here today online to join us for this live event. As Chloe said, we're all very excited to share this with you. This is the culmination of a lot of people putting things together to really make a much more cohesive story for all of you. And today, this is about Azure Static Web Apps, but more importantly, it's about your impact on the modern web and the evolution of it. Because yes, people at Microsoft, such as myself and Chloe and others, have helped bring this to you, but really, this was all inspired by your feedback and all of the content that you've put out there and your experiences. So my name's John Papa. You can reach me here live or answer questions as we go through, or you can find me on the web at Twitter at John_Papa. So what is today all about? Well, you're going to hear about 2 hours of some really great content from some amazing speakers today, talking about APIs and CLIs and how we're deploying through DevOps the web, and some amazing stories about what you can build. And you're going to hear about a lot of these different features. Here's just a couple of them. Azure Static Web Apps really combines all these things and more into one place. You get these integrated APIs, authentication, authorization, which is one of my favorite features because it's always a struggle for me to try to pull in security, make sure we've got SSL certificates in there, and get our staging versions out, and do this all at global scale. But it's important for us to just indulge a little bit about how we got here, because it's really great that we can look at these moments in time, like today, when we're launching a brand new service. But how do we get to this point, and what drove up to this is really driven by you. The web evolves because of all of that you put into this. Think about where we came from, and your journeys may have started at different places. Some of us have been using the web since the web kind of got created, right? And then there's different features that have come out. And others of us came in more recently, and there's still folks who are yet to come into this industry. And all of us have had an impact by the choices that we've made. So what would have happened if the road was not taken? Let's take a look back at some of the things, just a few, that might jog your memory of where we've come from in the web. Some of you out there may have used things like Backbone or Modernizer. Or does anybody out there remember making HTTP requests with XML HTTP request? How about when Babel and TypeScript and CoffeeScript came out and introduced a new way to write JavaScript? What about the browser wars and the DOMs that were out there? And one of my favorites is Have you ever in an index HTML page and you had 100 script tags in a row where that's the way you actually deployed your application, pre-Webpack and Gulp and Grunt? All those things are part of the journey that got us to this point. And now we're using some amazing, great tools like React and Angular and Vue and Svelte, even new tools that came out last week like Quick. But let's not forget the server-side story as well. ASP.NET has been a big piece of this along the way, and tools like PHP. But I want to take you to a couple of moments in time that I think are really pivotal in how this got evolved. And let's start with where you were on your journey. So this is for all of us. You may have had experience a lot of those things I mentioned, like the cross-browser JavaScript days, when you had to write if-then statements depending upon the browser you're using and the version of the browser inside of JavaScript, pre-web frameworks. And then some of us started with the jQuery era, where jQuery kind of solved part of those problems for us. We could write one set of code. And then we had some early web frameworks, things like Dojo and Backbone. Others of us are starting more recently where we got a lot of the build tools like NPM or Webpack or Vite or Snowpack, some of the new modern ones. And then, of course, all the CI/CD tools that we've been using for the last couple of years that have really gotten amazing, like Azure Devops. And then the modern web frameworks that we use every day. And let's not forget WebAssembly and Blazor. Likelihood is you're in one of these three categories of where you kind of jumped into the timeline of using your web journey. But there's also another group. And this is an important group. It's the people that are coming in today and in the future. Those developers are going to be inspiring what we do with those tools moving forward. So this story is for all of us to figure out, how do we get here? Because really, this is one moment in time and one great product that we're looking at sharing with you all to make your lives easier, but it's just something that's gotten created because of you and the things you've brought to the table. So let's look at three pivotal moments in the web. To me, jQuery was a game changer. When jQuery came out, it was effectively a solution to a big problem a lot of us had in the web. Everybody was trying to figure out, how do we move more to the browser without having to write, if you're in IE5, do this. If you're in IE6, do that. If you're in Netscape, do this. If you're in Safari, do that. If you're in Chrome, a lot of conditional logic. It was really painful. And jQuery helped standardize writing code on the web in the browser. And then the DOMs got web standards. And then all those document object models became the same. And I remember the key moment when Microsoft announced years ago that ASP.NET's templates were now going to include jQuery out of the box, the most recent version of jQuery. And that was really a game changer, because now we're talking about a very stable and widely used framework like ASP.NET introducing jQuery, a JavaScript library, which at the time, it was kind of crazy to think about all these different things we could do in the web. So this was a big change, and it drew a lot of more people into using the browsers. And that was driven by people's desire to go to those browsers. Another thing that was really pivotal was when all the web frameworks started to get created and out of the guidance and patterns that people wanted. There were a lot of JavaScript frameworks, and a lot of these libraries are out there. And it seemed like we were getting one every other week. And I think we did, to be honest. It was really getting kind of out of control. So what happened was people started asking, all of you, for guidance and patterns on web frameworks and how we should evolve these. And out of that, we got these different patterns we could use, like MVC and MVVM, and they got brought to the web itself into JavaScript. And out of this came the four most commonly used web frameworks that we use today, like Angular, React, Vue, and Svelte. And these things are constantly moving forward for us. So once we have these, now we can all agree, okay, we're going to pick one of our favorite web frameworks and we'll drive the web forward with those. There was another pivotal moment in the web for me. And that was back in about 2015 when VS Code, or Visual Studio Code, was announced at the Build conference, almost 6 years to last month. And why this was important was we had a lot of different tools that we could use to build on the web. I remember a moment when I was at Disney and we were being asked to standardize on the development editors for web development. Well, I went and did an inventory to find out, well, what's everybody using? I came up with a list of 15 different editors and tools and IDEs that were being used. And it was very obvious right off the bat that there was no standard out there. There were tools like Vim and Sublime and Brackets and Atom and IntelliJ and Visual Studio and so many different tools, Eclipse, NetBeans, all these things were out there. And they were all valuable in different ways. And Visual Studio was a response, Visual Studio Code was a response to we needed something to be lightweight to fit on that timeline between super fast to edit files and also really rich IDE. And it fits somewhere in the middle to say we need to have the power of the IDE, but the speed of those other tools. And today, VS Code is the most commonly, most popular used editor that's out there for the web. What this did is it helped us then drive the tooling into something like VS Code that helps us build these applications. Today, you can deploy an Azure Static Web App using a VS Code extension by clicking a button, which is just amazing. So these were 3 pivotal moments in time, but I want to talk a little bit more about why this happened. Because our story is a hero story, and the hero in this is you. You are the hero in this because you're driving all these needs. There's no magical force that's saying, okay, we need to move to this point in the next step of the evolution of the web. No, that magical force is you. It's all the stuff that you're building and the choices you're making. And companies like Microsoft and us are listening to those, trying to help adapt and make your lives easier. So all of this happens, for example, in another pivotal process that happened a couple of years ago. Today's modern web apps, the ones you use now, they all rely on a build process. And that build process is to help us get everything up into the browser. Gone are the days when we could just take a script and throw a script tag on the page or throw 100 script tags on index.html and let our app run. Now we need to make sure we're building things so they run in the browser and it's lightweight. We're not making a bunch of trips back and forth, and it's just super fast and easy. So we run npm run build, and we run npm run build in all these different web frameworks. What happens effectively is some compilation process works on a server, and it outputs our HTML, our JavaScript, and our CSS. And those 3 things are the core of what the web uses, and that all goes up to the browser, along with other assets like images and fonts. So that will then light up our applications. And effectively, what we want is to take this build process, and then the output of that goes up into the web, and people can use it in their browsers. So then you can choose whether it's Angular, Svelte, React, Vue, whatever your framework happens to be, any of these, and they all run through these build processes, and we get this output that we need. Okay, so you're making your choices for your tools. You have chosen that we want these build processes, but you also want to be able to just write code and get it up to the web. So let's take a step back here. What you do every day is build applications, maybe something like this application here in React. And let's think about what you do. You write code, you fill business needs, and then you try to publish to the web. So writing code is what you know if you're a developer, and publishing out to the web is what your company wants you to get it done with. They want you to actually deploy and deliver. So what is stopping us from just taking the code we write here locally on our machines and then just pushing it up to the web? Well, let's think this through a little bit. You have your code, right? This is what you build, and you probably keep it in some place like GitHub, your source control provider. That makes sense. And I think most of us these days are relatively comfortable with taking our code and putting it into source control somewhere. We can use tools like VS Code to push it up. So we push our code up to GitHub. That's great. And then we keep commits in there, and we might have a branching strategy where we have our main branch that we want for our development, and then we have some kind of staging branch, and we kind of merge them in. So we have our own strategies for our integration of our code. And we'd like that to run continuously if we can with tests. Now we've got our CI and our CD. So we have continuous integration of our code, but we also want, when we push our code, for it to just light up on the web. So how does that code then get to a website? Do I need to get like an IIS server or Apache server or some Nginx? I mean, how do I host my code up on a website and get it to at global scale? And let's not forget about APIs. Most of our web apps need data. So are we going to create our own API server, maybe with like ASP.NET MVC or with Java, or hitting a third-party website? And do we have multiple of these that are out there? Maybe you want to use serverless out there to use like Azure Functions to host them up. So we don't have to worry about the servers. Okay, now once we have a website, our React app here, and we also have our APIs, Azure Functions, we could run into a problem of CORS. Those cross-origin requests that we have. We're serving on two different servers, right? So how do you actually communicate between those two securely? That's where you have to make sure you've got like a reverse proxy. And up there, the reverse proxy has to route your requests from your web app to your API. Okay, we have to set that up, and our business also needs a custom domain. I said I worked for Disney before. You're not going to see a Disney site up on some random URL, right? There's custom domains. Whatever your company is, you've got your own custom domain. And SSL is super important. We want there to be security on our site and all the standards. So we have to get our SSL certificates. Authentication is really important because I'm breaking down that we need the websites to say you are who you say you are. If you're going to go to a site like this shop at home example in React, I need to make sure that when Sally logs in or Chloe logs in, that I know it as indeed Chloe. So I need authentication. Well, I also need roles because maybe Chloe logs in or I log in or you log in and I know who you are, but now I need to know what can you do. So authentication and authorization for roles. And of course, global scale. Right now, you're sitting somewhere at your house or your business or maybe outside enjoying the outdoors. And where you are could be anywhere in this world. We want to make sure that our application is deployed at scale at the closest point of presence to where you are, using things like CDNs. And we want redundancy built in. Okay, so that's what you're doing today. You're building apps with code, but you need all of this to happen in one place. Now, how can you do that? Well, easy. You just go to any major cloud provider and you use their CI/CD. You kind of create some functions or some server side with APIs. Maybe you employ some kind of reverse proxy. You can pull in your own authentication providers if you want to. You can customize across multiple different services. And all of these are things that you can do in one place with multiple services, but you have to tie it all together. The key is, though, we heard the feedback and the industry has really changed on this. The pivotal moment we're in now is that nobody wanted to do these things and many, many others. Nobody wants to go out there. You didn't want to go out there and put 10, 20 things together. We wanted the services to do this for us. This is a common pattern. Think about when you drive a car or you ride a bicycle. If you had to go buy all the parts and then put it together yourself, that's not nearly as great of experience as I just wanted to ride the bike or drive the car. You want somebody else to put those together for you so we can use those vehicles. And that's really what Azure Static Web Apps is the vehicle to take all those pieces so you can not think about them and you can just think about, I want to write code and get us to this great place. So really, this just needed to be a lot easier and it needed to be a lot faster. So we took a lot of your feedback and we created to this point of what we could do with Azure Static Web Apps. So let's take a quick look at what you're going to see today in Azure Static Web Apps. This is where we are. As of the live launch, you can make your code changes and then you can choose, okay, do I want to run through Github Actions to deploy my apps, or do I want to use Azure Devops or maybe another source control continuous delivery mechanism? So we're going to see how we can write our code, we can push it, and then after it's pushed, it could build automatically on a server. You don't have to worry about building it locally because now we've got a server that'll do that for you. And then the service will then deploy your static content. Static content just represents your HTML and your images, JavaScript, CSS. It's static because now it's built. We push it up to the website at global scale. And then optionally, if you have APIs with your serverless functions, you can push those up to Azure Functions as well. And collectively, that is Azure Static Web Apps. All of this happens within, could be seconds or could be minutes, depending upon your build process. So I write code, I push, and it goes up and gets deployed to the cloud at scale. Now, that's all in the cloud. But if you might be thinking what I was thinking when I got into this is great. So I can write all this and make it work in the cloud. But if I've got serverless functions running the cloud and I've got all this other stuff working with my application, how do I know that what's working in the cloud works locally? And how do I know what works locally works in the cloud. I want my development environment to work as closely as I can to what I have up in the cloud. And I bet you do too. We don't want any surprises. Again, when I worked at Disney and we had to put something out major, I didn't want to get a phone call 2 a.m. because something I did didn't work in production, but it worked locally. That doesn't really fly, right? So you want to make sure that what you have locally works up there. So it's all about confidence and trust. So one of the great feedbacks that we heard from you all was this, that you wanted it to work as closely to emulate local what's going to happen in the cloud. And out of that, you're going to hear a great story today from Wasim right after this keynote about the Static Web Apps CLI and how you can do the things that are in the cloud locally on your computer. You can emulate your authentication and your API requests. It can handle that reverse proxy for you to tie in your static web app with your functions. And you can run it all local so you can have that confidence in what you're doing locally is also going to work after you push to GitHub and it eventually ends up on Azure. So it's really great that we have this feedback mechanism to how to get there. And to this point, there's a lot of ways that we've heard this feedback. So these are some of the recent features that we listened to you on and you drove to be in the product. So for our launch, I've mentioned some of these like choosing your own web framework. You can choose the 4 I mentioned, or maybe you choose Next or Gatsby or Nuxt or Quick or 11t or many of these others that are out there. Maybe you're just using vanilla JavaScript and HTML. That works too. Or possibly you're using Blazor with ASP.NET and you're using WebAssembly. Those are features that are in there today. You drove them. We also heard that you wanted first-class support for something beyond just GitHub Actions. So now we've got support for pipelines like Azure Devops as well, and more coming. Your feedback also drove that not only did you want SSL certificates to be easy to use, but you also wanted them to be automatically deployed and then have Apex domains or root domains. So I could just say shop@home.com or .dev for my application. And then I just mentioned how we have now a CLI and a local emulator. This was in response to you all wanting to be able to run it locally and what's in the cloud in the same way. These are features you drove. And it's really important to understand that this journey isn't complete unless all of us are driving this together. My job at Microsoft is a developer advocate. And as a developer cloud advocate, what I do is I listen to you and bring feedback into the product teams and then back out from the product teams to you. It's that mechanism that I really enjoy because I get to hear your stories and your experiences, and we get to take your feedback and really work with all the teams to figure out what's the right thing to do to keep the web moving forward. And that's the best part of this job, is I get to work with you all on really fulfilling your dreams and what you want to come out with this. So the feedback doesn't stop here. This is a great day because there's an opportunity for you to engage with the people who created great websites in the community, people who've created Azure Static Web Apps and different features, and also with each other. This is the next step of one of those pivotal moments in the web's journey. And the feedback will continue. And now we invite you to join us here to ask questions, and then also to continue that story by adding your issues and concerns and questions up at our GitHub website, where we can consolidate all that information and continue to listen to your feedback. So thank you all for coming here. And Chloe, I turn it back to you.
Now I'm muted. I was just trying to make everybody feel comfortable with the muting thing. I was just saying I was just feeling so nostalgic for some of these older technologies that you mentioned, John. And I couldn't agree more. I was recently teaching some new students programming who are completely new to software engineering and explaining this whole concept of not having to reinvent the wheel and using other pieces of technology to not having to start from scratch, I think was a huge mind-blowing lesson for them. They thought they'd have to build everything by hand, reinvent the wheel. What are some of your favorite, well, first I'll ask, do you have any missed or, you kind of have a nostalgia for technologies that aren't with us anymore? Do you miss any? I know recently Flash was taken away, and I remember Flash was a huge part of the internet when I was watching a lot of online animation. Any ones that you're missing these days?
I wouldn't say I'm missing a lot of them, but I definitely have memories of several. I think a lot of what we've done is moved forward. In some ways, the one thing I miss a little bit is there are times that I feel like, it was, the grass is always greener. It was nice when I could just create a script tag and throw my code in it and just go. But it wasn't realistic either to build a full-fledged application in a script block in the middle of an HTML page either. So, but grass isn't always greener. But you know what? I'll look back fondly on that.
Right. And I think, we really take for granted now how many tools we have available to us. Like, we truly have a lot of things. We stand on the shoulders of giants, truly, and that we have all of these pieces that can help us put together a website, either a static website or a huge application very quickly. What are some of your favorite new ones out there?
Oh, one of my favorite new tools is the way that Vite is working with the ecosystem. So we can run what's locally on the web. So we have a dev server, and we can also get that instant HMR, basically. I never remember the exact acronym. I'll be honest here. Hot module reloading, hot module replacement. Effectively, what it means is you type code and it's instantly changed inside your browser. And we've had evolutions to that, but I feel like Vite is just the next level to get us there. And one of the other things I really love is I'm really loving using Svelte out there. I love all the modern frameworks, but maybe it's because it's newer, a couple of years old versus some of the others, but I really enjoy the simplicity of using it.
We have a great question here, which I'm sure people are thinking this as we're talking about static web apps today. Is static web apps the ideal choice for a personal blog?
Oh, that's a really good question. So if you're going to create your personal blog, I guess the first question is, are you going to create your own, or are you going to go use a service? Which I think is everybody should start there. And I've done both, and there's pros and cons to each. But if you're going to create your own, I think it's a great choice for running your own personal blog, because effectively you're going to be creating content. Maybe let's just say you use Gatsby, maybe Eleventy, and you're creating your own content, and then it ends up being just static files. So your output of those, you could host them up on a CDN, and you want them to be super fast in global scale. It seems like a great choice to me.
Yeah. And I guess it really depends on, how you're going to be using it. But I think when I think of static web pages, I'm thinking blogs, I'm thinking personal brand websites. There's so many different uses. What are your favorite kind of use cases for static web apps that you've seen out there in the wild?
So I kind of lean in the other direction because, again, we lean towards our biases. And my experience has been building things like we talked about at Disney, large websites that millions of people use. And I can think now and back, if I had these tools 10 years ago, when I was doing some of those things, I wouldn't have had to deploy VMs and servers everywhere to do what I did. My favorite thing is when you go to a website and you see it's running on a CDN like this, and really the only thing that is leaving the server are the HTTP requests that are being made to these APIs on these backend systems. And to me, that's really the core of Azure Static Web Apps, what it serves.
We've truly come so far from the days of GeoCities, AngelFire. I remember spending many time on my O-Town fan page on GeoCities. But it's great because I feel like this makes it so much more accessible to folks, and you can just get up and running so quickly, which is,
Yes.
I mean, tell me, John, back in the day, was there, other than the GeoCities and AngelFires of the world, of course, how easy was it to just spin up something like this, like in your time at Disney or before that?
Well, before we go in the Wayback Machine, a lot of it was just FTPing to a server. I was talking with Craig Shoemaker, one of our documentation writers who does a lot of the work on Static Web Apps this morning. And he was having memories of taking his own websites for his company, zipping them up and FTPing them up to a website on a server, 15, 20 years ago. And we can still do that. But back when we had more, let's go back maybe 5, 10 years, a lot of our process was create our own build steps using tools like Grunt and Gulp to take the files, and we used new words they sounded fancy, like mangling and minifying and putting bundles together. And that's really what it was. The problem was there was so many different players involved that you had to learn a wide plethora of things to get it done. Webpack kind of solved that. And that's kind of where Azure Static Web Apps came in, right? Now to deploy to the web, when somebody says deploy, they expect all those things I mentioned to be there. And Azure Static Web Apps is just like, press a button, you're done.
It's magic. Truly, I remember, speaking of nostalgic early internet, I remember being obsessed with Smarter Child. It was like one of the first chatbots that you could talk to on AOL Instant Messenger. If you told me now that I could like whip up a chatbot in like, 10 minutes with tools like Logic Apps, I'd tell you, no way. I can't build anything like that. So it's so cool. We have these just kind of almost puzzle pieces that we can put together to assemble these huge projects that we put on, or just a static web app. So, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for all of the other talks that we're going to have today. But John, any final words before we hand off from the keynote to our other talks here today?
Really just more about the feedback, and you all out there, just we're listening, and it's not just us. The whole industry is listening to the things you're doing. And I think about, again, the road not taken. When you're driving down a path and working on your development story and your business solutions, think about the choices you're making and share them with us, share them with the world. Get on social media, get on GitHub Issues, talk to us, come to Learn TV. Really engage with us, because together we can build so much more moving forward. And I don't think this is the end. This is a launch day, but this is really just the next step on the evolution of where we're all going to be in, next year and 5 years down the road.
I can't wait for next year's Static Web Apps Conf. Thank you so much, John, for that amazing keynote this morning, for kicking things off. And I can't wait to, I'm going to look up some of those older web technologies. Some vintage ones on there that I have not touched. I'm very curious about. But I'm going to be also hitting you up with some Disney questions later. We got to talk about the new Loki.
Anytime. Come visit.
All right. Thank you, John. Okay, wow, y'all, that was so much fun. I'm learning so much. Again, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from, what you want to learn today. All of your questions will be taken live. You can join us at aka.ms/learntv. And just like John said, we want your feedback. We want your questions. We are huge on feedback here at Microsoft. And truly, the feedback that you give us ends up affecting our products and making them so much better. So feedback it up. Go to that awesome GitHub repo that John shared, and we would love to hear more from you. Okay, we got to get to our next talk, y'all. Exciting stuff here. We have a full day of Static Web App content for you. So sit back, relax. Time to get going on our next talk here. So we next have Wasim. Wasim once managed to control his coffee machine with his mind, using brain-controlled technology. Where were you when I needed you this morning, Wasim? Welcome to the Static Web Apps Conference. Hello.
Hi, Chloe. Thanks for having me.
Of course. What are you going to be talking to us about today?
Oh, so I will be presenting about the Static Web Apps CLI, the new command line tool interface, and basically how to improve your local dev environment and enjoy building for Static Web Apps.
So exciting. I will let you take it away.
Thank you. So hi, my name is Wasim Shigam. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Microsoft, working on everything JavaScript and developer tooling. And I've worked on the CLI actually. And this is a look at the new Azure Static Web Apps command line tool interface. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you will be able to use your favorite tools and your local dev setup to run, debug, and test your application locally before deploying them on Azure Static Web Apps. But before we start, let me introduce you to Naya. Naya is an experienced software developer, and Naya and her team are working on a large web application, which happened to be written in Angular, but this doesn't matter, and using an API backend built on top of Azure Functions. The app has also been configured using some configuration file to restrict and protect some sections of the app. So Naya and her team also have already deployed their app on Azure Static Web Apps, and the experience was pretty good so far. However, as Naya keeps adding new features and fixing bugs, she wants to be able to debug her app locally using the dev server and tooling that come with her modern JavaScript dev setup. And because Naya is used to that faster developer feedback loop, so preventing her from that feedback loop could potentially drop her productivity. So, as I said, she wants to keep using her favorite tools that make her productive, and she also want to focus on her code base and doesn't want to mess with configuration or any setup or proxy or whatever. So basically, Naya just wants to be able to try some of the Azure Static Web Apps features locally so she can detect any issue before she deploys her app on the staging environment and, keep that feedback loop faster, but also shorter. So in order to help Naya improve her developer experience, we need to provide her and her team with a tool that's able to serve static content for the front-end part, and preferably also allow Naya to keep relying on her existing dev servers, which usually come with some pretty nice features such as hot model replacement. And also that tool should allow Naya to use and access her backend API in a seamless manner without even having to configure a proxy or deal with cross-origin resource sharing or HTTP calls. That tool also should understand both authentication and authorization rules, so Naya and her team can try out those the auth experience locally and easily adapt the user experience of their application. So to summarize, we need to provide Naya and her team with a tool that's able to emulate parts of Azure Static Web Apps runtime locally. And I need to emphasize actually that we only need to emulate or mimic some of the experience that Azure Static Web Apps provides on production. Because obviously we don't want to replicate the whole Azure runtime locally, which also would be very challenging to do. So before we move on, let's now have a look at Naya's typical local dev setup. So usually Naya would use her dev server that comes with her JavaScript stack. This happened to be Angular in this case. And Naya would access her front-end app through a defined address and port, which is localhost on port 42,000 here for Angular. Then she must configure a proxy to be able to access her backend API, which is running on a different port and hence subject to CORS. On the other hand, if we try to have a high-level look at the Azure Static Web Apps runtime on Azure, we might probably find something that looks like the following. You access your web app from a secure custom domain, and then through your browser, obviously, the browser would then fetch all the static content that's required for your app to run. And then all requests for the API are handled by the Azure Functions through the same domain, running on the same port, basically. And then all the requests that deal with authentication are managed by the auth runtime. And of course, they use external auth providers, so your users can use their favorite providers to log in on your application. So the static content, the authentication runtime, and the API are all managed by Azure Static Web Apps for you automatically, and everything is powered by Azure. So we need a tool to replicate parts of those components locally, and that tool is Azure Static Web Apps CLI, also known as SWA CLI. So in order to understand how the SWA CLI works, we need to go back to Naya's and her local dev setup and see how the CLI would help her emulate parts of Azure Static Web Apps on her local machine. So again, Naya would run the Static Web Apps CLI, and she would access her application through the default URL, which is localhost on port 4280, which is the default address for the Static Web Apps CLI. And she can also configure HTTPS by adding the --SSL flag when starting the CLI. So the CLI would automatically serve the static content from disk, and it will also route all the API calls to the Azure functions, and all authentication routes and requests will be handled by the local auth emulator. And that's basically how the SWA CLI works. The CLI also supports connecting to local dev servers, either for the front-end application or back-end. And in this case, the CLI doesn't serve the content directly from disk, but instead it would forward all requests to the dev servers, allowing Naya and her team to keep using those nice features, again, hot model replacement, but also the ability to set breakpoints in their code. And yeah, that's basically the high-level architecture of the Azure Static Web App CLI. And of course, the CLI is hosted on GitHub. It's open source, and you can check out the code if you like to, and also contribute. So in order to use the Static Web App CLI, Naya would need to run the npm install at Azure/Static Web App CLI, either locally or globally. So fun fact, we publish the CLI on npm, so Naya would need to have Node.js and npm installed on her machine in order to download the CLI. So because she's using modern JavaScript stack, she probably have Node.js installed anyways. Once the Azure Static Web App CLI is installed, Naya would use the SWA command to interact with the Static Web App CLI. And the CLI has many options, actually, but we can invoke it using the default options just by calling SWA start. So for instance, Naya can cd into her Static Web Apps folder, or go at the root of the folder that contains the static assets that she wants to serve. Then she would run SWA start to serve that static content from disk. Next, if Naya wants to serve the content of the dist folder of her Angular application, she would need to first build her application using the ng-build command that comes with her Angular CLI. And then she would run SWA start dist app folder, which contain the build source of her Angular app. And also, if Naya is using a backend API with Azure Functions, she needs to explicitly use the --API flag when starting the SWA CLI. So when using the --API flag with a folder that contains an Azure Functions app project, the CLI would spin up an Azure Functions application using the Func CLI that comes with the Azure Functions core tools, and automatically configure cores and have the API available to you. And as we mentioned earlier, the SWA CLI also supports connecting to different dev servers. And Naya can do that by simply using the dev server URI instead of pointing to folders on disk. And she can freely mix both of those configurations. So either serving the static content from a folder and pointing the API to a dev server, or pulling the static content from the dev server and using the API folder as a backend API source, or pointing both the static content and the API to their respective dev servers. One of the many features that the CLI support is the ability to parse and apply the static web app.config.json file, which we use to configure Azure Static Web Apps applications by controlling some of the settings, such as routing, securing your routes, or authentication and authorization, fallback rules, defining HTTP response overrides and global HTTP headers, and also defining your own custom MIME types. So if the CLI finds that configuration file under your Static Web Apps project it would use it by default and parse it and apply that configuration. Also, when it comes to authentication, and given the complexity of that feature, the Static Web App CLI makes it easy for Naya and her team to simulate user session data and user rules by providing on the fly the required information to be used during the login process. And this information would be used across the whole session until the user logged out. And one thing to mention here is that when the user has been authenticated, the SWA CLI will generate and propagate the authentication cookie that contains the user principals information across both the static content, but also the backend API on the Azure Functions project. And there are many more options that we don't have time actually to cover today in this presentation, but they're all documented in the GitHub repo. So voila, Naya and her team can now work and test their application locally while enjoying the Static Web Apps experience provided by the new CLI. And one last step that Naya and her team and you should do is to make sure you star and subscribe to the GitHub repo so you can get notified whenever there is a new release of the CLI. This is really important, especially during this period, because the CLI is still in preview. So make sure you start the project and subscribe to receive the notifications. So thank you all. This was a look at the new Azure Static Web Apps CLI. And yeah, thank you for joining me. Back to you, Chloe.
I'm muted again. I was making sure no one heard me slurping on my coffee here. I was just saying, amazing talk. I loved all the examples that you gave in there of just how to go throughout the process of getting this done and using the CLI. Let's see. Ooh, let's see if we've got some questions in the chat here. Definitely drop your questions for Wasim if you have any of them. But I've got one for you. What are the next features provided in the SWA CLI? Lots of abbreviations there.
So do you mean the upcoming features?
Yes.
So the one thing I haven't mentioned actually is that the CLI is used closely with the VS Code extension. So the VS Code extension team is relying on the CLI to spin up that local dev server. So we're working closely with them to improve the developer experience, but also the user experience of the CLI by providing a couple of features to help the VS Code experience. So some of the things that we're planning and some of the things that I haven't mentioned actually during my talk is, well, configuring SSL. That's super easy just by providing the SSL flag and your certificate. And also the ability to pre-build your local front-end application, but also the Azure Functions before starting the CLI. So that's also supported by the tool. And also being able to run your dev servers automatically instead of having multiple terminals laying around. So that's also supported. And yeah, we have a couple of ideas I can't share yet, but if you, if the audience has anything that they want to see in the CLI, please reach out to us on the GitHub repo and open a feature request. And yeah, let's discuss that there.
We're really not kidding here. We run on feedback here, y'all.
Yeah.
So any product feedback you have, any features that you want, send them along. We are listening. We want to know. You are the folks we build these tools for. You are the developers. So tell us. And also, I have a question for you. Can I contribute to the Static Web App CLI?
Definitely. I mean, the project has been open source from the beginning, and it's still open source since, yeah, you can go there and either, you can contribute by using the CLI and giving us feedback. You can open issues, obviously, open feature requests. And if you can do, we're also happy to get your pull requests merged into the project. So definitely, check out the repo. I can share the link after the talk, or we'll have it somewhere. So yeah, definitely that's possible.
We've got a question here from Oscar. Is the CLI available in Azure Cloud Shell?
I mean, the CLI is available from NPM. So on Azure Cloud Shell, I think Node.js is installed. I mean, the last time I checked, Node.js was installed, so NPM was installed as well. So yes, you can download it there.
Fantastic.
If you can't, please let me know.
Yeah, again, we run on feedback here. We're all available on Twitter through all of these different GitHub repos. So please reach out and let us know what you want. Let us know what you don't want. We want to hear it all, positive and negative. That's how we improve. Wasim, any closing remarks before we close out your session here?
I just want to thank all folks who have contributed to the CLI, I mean, internally, but also externally. And yeah, thank you all, and thank you for the feedback. And also thank you for those who are going to contribute to the CLI.
Yes, future contributors of the world,
Exactly.
tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you. Contributions rule the world. Thank you so much, Wasim. And oh my goodness, y'all, we have so much content coming at you. We'll put up the agenda here in a second for anybody who's just joining us live now. But of course, we had our wonderful keynote this morning from John Papa. Don't worry, if you missed that, we will have recordings available. We just got done with Wasim to learn about the Static Web Apps CLI. And now we are going to learn about Static Web Apps and the production. Oops, it moved as soon as I was up there. But we're going to be learning all from Daria right now. I have some fun facts about Daria that I want to share. But before I do, I want to encourage everyone, any questions you have throughout any of these talks, even feedback. We'll take feedback in the chat as well. Please reach out and let us know. But next up, we have Daria, who has worked on web and serverless technologies for nearly a decade. Wow. Welcome to SWA Comp, Daria. How are you doing today, Daria?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
And Daria, what is your favorite thing about the web?
My favorite thing about the web and about working on web and serverless is just making it simpler and simpler and simpler for people and organizations to establish that web presence and participate in the global economy.
And that's so important. I think accessibility to being able to build websites, to be able to have any sort of, product or any sort of like enterprise software out there, but also just the local businesses or someone who has their own craft site can now get online, which is so exciting. So thank you for helping get everyone online here. And you're going to be talking to us about static web apps and the production API. Is that right?
Yes, I can't wait to tell you about essentially how to bring a serverless API to your Azure Static Web Apps project.
Ooh, I'm so excited. I'm taking notes. I've got my gel pens here. I will let you take away, Daria.
Thank you. Well, my name is Daria, and I am the PM manager working on Azure Static Web Apps. A little bit about our vision. Our vision for Azure Static Web Apps is to provide a hosting service and experience for streamlined full stack web development from source code to global high availability. Now, an optional component for that full stack web solution is the set of backend APIs that can be associated with your front-end static web app. Backend APIs are not required, but there are situations where they can be useful just to deliver a richer, more dynamic web experience. For this reason, Azure Static Web Apps includes a deep integration with Azure Functions to power your serverless APIs. This integration encompasses everything from local development to deployment to management in the cloud and to dynamic scale based on the demand of your end users. And with this, we can build a fully serverless app because we have essentially your static content that is now running on a web server. And then we have the serverless API that does not require you to manage any servers. And yet, it's a fully tailored, very powerful, and scalable solution for your web app needs. So today, we will talk about how simple it is to add these serverless APIs to your Azure Static Web Apps project. A good example for when it's useful to add APIs to your project is when you have any kind of pre or post-processing of data to personalize or to enrich the experience of your end users. This is the example that we will explore in our next steps. So for today, we will be looking at a sample React app. And all this app does is sourcing facts about the Earth from Azure Functions connecting to a Cosmos DB database. These facts, for demo purposes, are just sourced from Wikipedia with a proper citation in the source code. But we already have this composed solution that we can explore and expand. So let's go to our app right here. Okay, making sure that it's coming through. So here in our app, we have a button that is essentially just generating these facts every time that we click the button, calling Azure Functions and going to our Cosmos DB database. Now, when we go to our management experience in the Azure portal, you can see the Azure Static Web App, and you can see that we have essentially our connection to the source code, and we also have a tab here for Azure Functions. When we look at the Azure Functions tab, I have a function that is already listed, showing my facts about the Earth. Not only that, but the Azure portal tells me specifically that I'm deploying my functions from my repository, so I integrated these with my source code from my static web app. Now, in addition to integrating my source code, I also have integrated configuration. Here, I am able to specify my Cosmos DB connection string so that I can actually work with my function. So how did I do that? How do we make this happen? Well, here is my project, and you can see that in addition to my source code for the front end, I have an API folder. And in this API folder, I have my getFacts function. And right here, I can add a new function, so I can extend my API just by going to the Azure Static Web Apps extension and by asking it to add a new function for me. We'll call it demo. And if we go back to our source code, look at this. With just one click, I got a new function added. So it's easy not only to add this, but also to run everything locally. So this is a demo function. All it does is it gives me an HTTP trigger that I can call from my app. And the way that I would call it is directly as a relative route, because we expose these functions through the API route. So I would call it the same way that I call my get facts. And all I have to do is just specify the name of my function. That works both locally and in the cloud as well, because it's a relative path. If I want to run both my front end and my back end together right here, then I can run the Azure Static Web App CLI that Wasim just talked about. And I can tell this CLI that I have an API folder, and I would like my APIs to be started for me. And then I can essentially go to my local host, and I can work with both my front end and my back end together. So this is going to actually show me where I can access both of those components as it's coming up. And I can go to my browser right here. I can look at my app. Let's double check that this was started. Okay, let's just try again. And then it's great that I have all this information right here for me to get some feedback and know when everything is ready and when I can access all the components of my solution. So we're just going to give this another moment. There we go. Let's try that out. So here's my app, and it's loading artifacts. So it's calling my function, and you can see right here, I also have an emulator for auth. So I can essentially log in as myself, and I can test that as well so that I can have the full development stack available. So when I need to deploy this, all I have to do is commit my changes. And in my repo right here, my repo for artifacts, Azure Static Web Apps generates a workflow. And this workflow is essentially asking to listen for push of the code or pull request, and then triggers GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions gives us, of course, a lot of feedback and transparency for what happens with our project. And you can see that Azure Static Web Apps takes care of building everything for you, including the API. So here's an example of a previous run where you can see a successful build of my functions. So actually, all we had to do is use the tooling to add the API right from Visual Studio Code to run the front end and the back end together, and do that locally the same way that we would do in the cloud. So we have a great experience transitioning from local experience to remote cloud experience. And then Static Web Apps takes care of building and deploying everything, distributing the content for static front end globally, and associating the managed serverless functions, which are going to scale dynamically based on demand. Now, we could actually stop right here, but this is not where we stopped in building our support for serverless functions with static web apps. So we actually went one step further and we thought about what happens when you have an existing Azure Functions project, because you may want to reuse code that you've already written. You may want to have that API called from maybe more than just one client. And so I have a project right here that is an existing Azure function. It's a Python function. And I have this deployed to specifically my premium Azure functions. And I'm able to do things like building a word cloud, and in the future, adding more analysis to that. So every time that I call my function, I can essentially interact with it right here. This is my Azure function resource in the Azure portal. And you can see that I have my, my function added right here. It's hosted on Premium, like I mentioned, and I have the freedom to use more languages and more features because I'm managing this project independently. The configuration, unlike in the previous example, is specifically associated with the function app. So in this case, my Cosmos DB connection is specified here in the function app. And another thing that's specified right here is my App Insights integration. So when I go to App Insights, I can see this resource specifically. And I can also see its interaction with other components like the Cosmos DB database as well. Now, when I go to my front end from here, you can have the same experience. We go to the Functions tab and you can see this particular function app, even though it's an external resource, is now associated with my static web app. So I can access this under the API route, just as I did before. And when I call it from my code right here, you can see that I am calling it as if it was integrated with my Azure Static Web Apps project, because it is. And when I mean integrated, I really think about a full integration. Like, for example, if you have authentication and authorization enabled on your front end, which I do here, then you're able to propagate that end user information across your front end and your back end. So now that I am logged in, if I look here at my developer tooling, you will see that headers are being passed from the front end to the back end as well. So let's make another call to it and go to this function call, and I will point you to the information that we passed, so you can see right here that I am connected and I'm able to communicate that information to my backend. So that was kind of a whirlwind view of the integrations that we've built for you between Azure Static Web Apps and Azure Functions. Just to kind of recap this whirlwind of information, Azure Static Web Apps and Azure Functions are seamlessly integrated. We manage that integration with routing through the API route, and we don't even require you to configure cores because the calls are actually routed through our infrastructure. You have direct access to user authentication and role-based authorization, and this data is available across front-end and back-end. And once you have everything set up and ready for you in the cloud, Azure Functions scale dynamically to meet the low times and the high times of your end-user engagement. We went over two different options for integrating Azure Functions as your serverless APIs with Azure Static Web Apps. The first one was Manage Functions. This is essentially the option where you put your code in the same project structure for Static Web App and Functions, and then we are able to build, provision, and fully manage that from the Azure Static Web Apps platform. The second option is bringing your own functions. That is an existing Azure Function project that you deploy and configure as a standalone resource, and then you can connect to Azure Static Web Apps for all the benefits of the API integration. You can go to our docs for a list of features that are available for each of them. And you can see that there's a trade-off between having the convenience of us managing the functions for you. Sometimes that's all you need. And then the little bit of overhead of managing that yourself if you need just an extensive amount of flexibility with the list of features available. So there you go. You can learn all of this and more at AKMS Docs with our documentation.
I once again was muted. Daria, I was just saying I love Azure Functions. I use Azure Functions in all of my applications. So finding out that Azure Static Web Apps and Azure Functions play well together is just music to my heart. We have a bunch of questions for you here. So I'm going to just jump right into them. Is it possible to use more than one function app in a static web app?
At this point, no. But you can actually have more than one function in your function app. So again, we run on feedback. So we would definitely want to learn more about what and why you would need so that we can work on that for you.
Awesome. Yeah, and definitely check. You can leave any feedback in the chat. And of course, we have a bunch of links that we can share that you can provide product feedback. Here's a good question from Fred. Where would we see the console logs from Daria's function?
So because we have the integration with App Insights, you would basically interact with these functions through App Insights the same way that you interact outside of the context of Azure Static Web Apps.
Perfect. Super easy, all in one place. And then we had this question at the start of the conference, so I want to make sure that we ask it. When using managed functions with SWA, do you have some flexibility for warm, hot start, as with standard functions? If not, then how does CORS work when linking to an existing function app?
We talked about that a little bit in the sense of the trade-off between the convenience and the productivity of having us manage everything for you and having more flexibility and more control when you manage the resources. So when you run your functions yourself on something like premium functions, you can access more options in terms of the performance of those Azure functions. But because we link them back to our Static Web Apps resource, you again don't need to configure CORS because we route everything through our infrastructure for you.
Perfection. And one last question. Does the integrated function scale out separate from the SWA or do they scale out together?
I would say they scale out a little bit differently because for our static content, we distribute that globally for you from the moment of your deployment. But Azure Functions scale dynamically to 0 and back out when you need them to scale. If there's no activity, then being serverless, they don't need to run. And then we detect when there is end user activity, and then they scale as high or as low as they need to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Daria. I know I'm going to be watching this session back because I am just always playing with Azure Functions. I Azure Function all the things, so I cannot wait to dive deeper into that. Oh my goodness, y'all. We've already had so many amazing talks. A couple things before we move on to our next segments here. First of all, gotta plug the Code Skills Challenge, or the Cloud Skills Challenge, I should say. We are having a very, very cool Cloud Skills Challenge associated with this conference. Let's see, we're gonna put the link here, but it should be aka.ms/SWA challenge. You can go there and complete that. Make sure that you get your Azure Heroes badge, get a chance to be at the top of the leaderboard. Some pretty cool, fun stuff there. I think I'm going to go check it out in between these sessions. Try to participate in this Cloud Skills Challenge online. Join the fun, join the community, and of course, give us all of your feedback, positive, negative, new features you want removed. Let us know. We are here to listen. We truly build these products for you. So let us know what you're looking forward to, what you want, what you don't want. All feedback, we welcome it. Alrighty, y'all. So we are now getting into the kind of second half of our day here. But before we do, just a couple little reminders here. Make sure that you review our code of conduct. If you're just joining us, we want to make sure that we have a fun and enjoyable experience for everyone. Be kind is truly the TLDR here, but make sure that you review that. We also have folks in the chat that are monitoring the chat and answering all your questions as well. All right, y'all. Let's review the agenda real quick. Let's see where we're at. We just got done with Daria here, and don't worry if you missed any of these sessions. We're going to have recordings available after, so if you missed that awesome John Papa keynote or Wasim's talk, we'll make sure that you have recordings of that very soon. But next up, very, very excited. We're doing fantastic websites and how to deploy them with OAuth. And before we bring Ohad out, I have a little fun fact about Ohad here. He's the founder and CEO of Stackit and has been building products and companies for 25 years now, and recently took up construction as a hobby. Welcome, Ohad.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And yes, it's true. It's all true.
All of it's true. And how did you get started with construction? Was it during this pandemic that you got started with that?
It was a little bit before that. We got into a small project for my family, and we were on a budget, and it kind of coerced us to be very creative and get into the trade and we'll do this to save money and we'll do that to save money. And it was very exciting, and it's just fun to learn something new. And, I realized there's not a big difference between the different trades, if you will, whether it's, electrical or plumbing or static web apps or Python. And it's just skills, and it's fun to learn something new, especially, something physical. So yeah.
Well, I fully expect that any Stackit website, when you're working on it, has an under construction sign on it. Like our old days of technology we're chatting about with John Papa earlier. Well, I will let you take it away, and we make sure you put your questions in the chat. We'll be answering them afterwards.
Fantastic. So thanks for having me. And I have a slide deck to show and to kind of go along with a story that I want to share. And it's the story of fantastic websites and how to deploy them, and how the how the internet is basically slowly shifting and really undergoing a super interesting trend change in terms of how we build websites, how do we deploy websites, how do we manage websites. And the shift is mainly from kind of old school monolithic systems that were both a site builder, plugin ecosystem, a theme ecosystem, an admin panel, and a web server kind of all together. And the two biggest examples are WordPress and maybe Drupal. And we're slowly shifting into this new and exciting way of building websites that has come out of the needs that developers have had and DevOps people have had over the years. The need for better security, better performance, the ability to work with data separately from the site itself, and so forth and so forth. So why don't I delve in here, and please throw questions into the comments. I'm super ecstatic about static websites and the Jamstack, and I'm going to talk to you about that. So as mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Stackit, and Stackit is the Jamstack site builder for developers. What's what's a site builder? What's a Jamstack? I'll unpack that a little bit in a moment. But the crux of it is that we've built a site builder that puts developers first and focuses on developers. It empowers the people that they work with, whether those are marketers or clients or stakeholders within a company, to work in concert with them using modern technologies and static websites. So we're familiar with site builders, right? Like there's Wix and Squarespace that are built for consumers, right? And developers will typically not get too excited about them because they don't really control the technology. They don't control the stack. They can't fix the speed if it doesn't load fast enough. They can't manage the deployment. They can't really do a lot of things. It's a very consumer-oriented product. We have Webflow, which is a very exciting product, but is also sort of a walled garden and is focused very much on designers, right? So it empowers designers to build websites without developers, which for developers is, not the most exciting thing, but at the same time, it's a great tool and it's very empowering for a lot of different marketing departments and people who want to do self-serve with an eye towards customization and so forth. We have site builders. I don't know if site builder is the right term, but like we have things like Adobe Experience Manager, which enterprises use to manage large scale, constantly going through A/B testing, massive e-commerce deployments, and so forth and so forth. And of course, we have like the monoliths, like WordPress. The challenge is that, nowadays, 2021, a lot of people are, either graduating from college or from a code camp or self-educating themselves about programming. PHP isn't really the most popular language out there. And developers more often than not are really excited about modern technologies, whether those are JavaScript or TypeScript, static web apps, or the Jamstack, Gatsby, Contentful, Sanity, and a variety of different tools that offer modernized developer experience. And so what we try to do, and what I'll show you in a moment, is basically build a site builder that is focused on developers and caters to the things that are important to them, but also empowers the people that they work with to actually work on websites. So let's unpack a little bit more about Jamstack and site builders. So Jamstack Architecture, which is very often synonymous with static websites. Jamstack site is basically a static website, and it's a very loosely defined concept. But the idea of Jamstack or modern static websites is that we have an opportunity to separate how a website is represented, where its content is stored and managed. It typically introduces the idea of actually building these sites from a source code and deploying them to a CDN, typically through a CI/CD service and a cloud, hosting provider, such as Azure Static Web Apps. And the reason that developers have kind of pushed forward this paradigm is that it's very, very convenient for them, and it solves a lot of problems for them. The first problem is that websites that are hosted from a CDN are ridiculously fast. They're kind of like as fast as can be, disregarding any kind of like JavaScript loading shenanigans. But your content or your website makes its way to the viewer as fast as could be. It's kind of infinitely scalable. The performance is really great. It's very secure because it's really hard to hack into a CDN. And so for those of us who are, who have scars from the days of having a WordPress website and finding it defaced or suddenly containing random links and the footer to drive traffic to somebody else's website, so that doesn't really exist much more. And lastly is just portability and control. It's kind of a microservice driven architecture. And the result of these separations is all of these great benefits. So what does it mean to build a Jamstack site builder and focus on developers? What it means is basically that we took something like Create React App or Next.js or Gatsby, and we put a Webflow-like user interface on top of it. Basically means that with Stackbit, you can come in, create a website from a variety of themes, own that website, own that content, right? So it spins up in your GitHub repository, you own the code, you have full control over the code. Because what we hear from developers quite often when they speak about, say Webflow, for example, is, well, Webflow gives me this little box, and it says this box is for developers, and developers can express themselves and do anything they need for that box. But that basically limits the effect that developers have on a website to scripts that get loaded after the DOM loads. That's a very, very, very limited amount of control. If you look at the Jamstack architecture and kind of fully owning the code for your website, we create a repo for you. You have the code. Does not have any kind of unique dependencies or any special packages. It's a website that you can take, you can build, you can work on it locally, you can work on it with a hybrid cloud environment, you can have it integrated into a CI/CD service, you can have it deployed. And so that's kind of how we think about what it means to put developers first. Additionally, the site builder itself has an integrated code editor. It has a schema editor, and it kind of talks about the idea of structured content, which typically drives static websites and Jamstack websites. And the cool thing is, as I mentioned, it also has like this Webflow interface, which is where you kind of invite your marketing folks and your customers and your stakeholders to, where they can do WYSIWYG editing, where they can add a component or add a CTA and work just like they're kind of in Webflow or Elementor or any Gutenberg on WordPress or whatnot, because people are like the less technical people have become accustomed to a site editing experience, which is very, very much high fidelity. And so if you take a marketing department that is used to working with Webflow, or people who in their free time are building sites with Wix, it's really hard to explain to them why for the company website, they're going to have to learn Markdown and learn how to commit to GitHub. And so bringing static websites and Jamstack websites to the enterprise, to SMBs, has been a little bit challenging because some of the kind of a lack of tooling and editability around it. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that. And the exciting thing that we're going to talk about specifically today is that with our new Azure integration, any Stackit user can deploy a Jamstack website to Azure, and any Azure customer can now create a Jamstack site in just a couple of minutes. So I'll have a demo up for you in just a moment. I spoke a little bit about structured content. And so for our, for the typical Stackit website, we'll store your content for the website. So it's basically all of the strings, all of the parameters that affect the display of your website, all of your images, kind of everything in Markdown files and config files that are part of your GitHub repo. So as a developer, you have full control, full visibility, but then your marketers can use the visual WYSIWYG tool to make changes, and those basically trigger commits to your Git repo. So the visual editing is very, very much high fidelity, and it's what people expect when they think about a modern site builder. But as a developer, it all ends up translating into commits, whether it's your code changes that you make either locally or in the integrated code editor, or whether it's content changes that a fellow marketer is doing. It all comes in as commits on the repo. The Azure integration is something we're pretty much very excited about because we're all about empowering developers to deploy anywhere that they want. And we know that especially for SMBs and enterprises, deploying to Azure, it can be a very, very valuable thing. So I want to do a quick walkthrough, mainly of what it looks like to set up a Stackit website from the Azure side, right? Because there's a little bit of configuration. You got to copy this, you got to move it here. So I kind of want to take you through that pretty quickly, and would love to answer any questions that folks may have after that. So let's run through this. This is pre-recorded, thankfully enough. Hopefully I can't make a mistake. But we visit the marketplace and find the Stackit app. That's kind of the first step. And there's going to be a couple of delays here, so I'm going to be saying a lot. So I apologize for that ahead of time. I'll try to smile. we create an instance of the app on the Azure side, and we'll typically create our own resource group or use an existing one. We then enter an application name, which is basically what's going to be created, and most of the other fields are automatically pre-filled. Once we get to actually deploying this resource within Azure, it takes a little bit. It can take a little bit of time, as in a couple of seconds or a minute or two. So just imagine a nice music flowing in the background, and how exciting life is going to be once this is set up, because you're going to be able to deploy modern static sites to Azure effortlessly as a developer, and offer that to your marketers and various stakeholders in the company. Once the deployment within Azure is ready, we'll have an opportunity to launch the Stackit site builder. So Stackit is kind of split into two pieces, which you don't necessarily need to think about it that way, but technically there's the, hey, we're going to create a website step, which spins up a new repo, lets you pick a theme and so forth. And then the next thing that you do is you find yourself in this visual editor. So from Azure, we're going to click Stackbit. It's going to take us to, basically gives the opportunity to create a new website. This particular website is going to use Next.js and one of the themes that we saw there. After we pick the theme, we connect our Azure account by grabbing the tenant ID and then the managed resource group ID and put those in. It literally takes a minute for Stackbit to spin up the site. And we now have a repo that you can clone locally and work on locally as a developer, create new components, modify behavior, do basically anything you want. And at the same time, your marketer, stakeholder, client, if you're an agency or a freelancer, can use something like this to actually edit strings, images, add new pages, tweak components, and so forth and so forth. So if I recap what we just saw, you can visit the Azure Marketplace. We have a nice short link to take you straight to the Stackbit app, and that's stackbit.link/Azure-app. You go through the setup, you create a new website with Stackbit. You make all of the choices with regards to the theme, the static site generator that you want to use, and you enter your tenant ID and the managed resource group ID, which is very important to tie this to your actual Azure deployment. And that is basically it. Present your fellow folks with a great editing experience, and off to the races. So that's basically the pre-recorded demo, and would love to answer any questions folks have about static websites on Azure and how to create them with Stackbit.
Okay, first of all, have to compliment the amazing skeleton and very cool dog GIF in this presentation. Thank you so much. Oh, this was great. I do have some questions here. My first question though is, was the title of your talk a reference to Harry Potter?
Well, there's a very good chance that it was.
Good. I love love the reference. We have a lot of fun Disney and mystical references throughout this event today.
Right. Yeah. For those who aren't familiar, Fantastic Beasts and where to find them is a Harry Potter reference.
So I have a question for you. What did you set out to achieve originally with Stackbit?
I decided together with two good friends to start Stackbit when we saw static websites becoming popular and mainstream to an extent that we felt it was unstoppable, that this shift from let's serve our website from a server with all of the pros and cons that emanate from that to like, hey, we can actually build our website and host it from a CDN. When we saw that shift happening, we thought it was a once in a kind of generation opportunity in terms of technology to recreate the tools that people use, because most of the tools that we're familiar with don't really support this paradigm because it is so different. It is so different. And we basically felt that there was an opportunity to build the next WordPress, if you will.
Yeah. So what kind of companies are using it then? Are we talking like kind of smaller companies or large scale companies? Who gets the best use out of this product?
Thankfully enough, Stackbit usage is very varied. In terms of company building, when we think about ourselves, we're very bottoms up driven. And so what it means is that a lot of developers use Stackbit to build their personal websites, to build their grandma's website for the crochet collection, because we all manage websites for family and friends, and we're constantly looking for better ways to do that. So we have a lot of that. And then that basically translates into people who get more excited about static websites and Jamstack sites and the ability to create and work on them with Stackbit. And so they start using Stackbit within startups, within SMBs, and more recently also within enterprises. We have a lot of features that are very, very focused on enterprises, whether it's A/B testing or collaboration or scheduled releases or whatnot. So we kind of cover the gamut, but most of the usage and excitement right now is with independent developers, either for themselves, for their company, for their agency, for their clients.
Yeah, making things easier to get online. It feels like we have so many tools and ways to make the web and websites and static pages more accessible to more people. And thank you so much for helping doing that, bringing people onto the internet. All right, y'all. I have one more question here, and we are going to move on to our next section. But Ohad, what do you think about static websites in the Jamstack? Is this a match made in heaven? Are you a huge fan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trends I feel this trend is unstoppable. I'm super excited about static. We're constantly dealing with like, how do I do that with a static website? And the ecosystem is producing more and more strategies and services to kind of address that. And so I feel like it's a winning strategy, and I'm super happy to have kind of like gone all in on it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, any feedback. I am so excited, y'all. We have a quick little break coming up here. We are going to hear a message from my coworker and dear pal, Christopher Harrison, and he's going to tell you all about his amazing show, Web Wednesdays. Take it away, Christopher.
I'm Christopher Harrison. I'm the host of Web Wednesday, the weekly show where I bring on some really cool guests to talk about web dev technology. Coming up, Beth Pan to talk about the Graph Toolkit, Don Papa to talk about Svelte, Jen Looper, Explore Lobe, which is a really neat AI technology. And I'm also going to be working on getting Cecil Phillip to come back and talk more about Blazor. So those and a host of other topics that we start to dig into. So if you're already familiar with them, it's a great opportunity to ask questions and go a little deeper. And if you're brand new, it's a nice chance to start to explore and see what it is that these techs can do for you. We answer all the questions that we possibly can, so I hope to see you there. Come join us Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Pacific. See you there.
Y'all, highly recommend checking out Web Wednesdays. Had a great chat on there recently with Christopher about public speaking and technology and different ways to use improv and how to improve your communication skills. Check out all those previous episodes on YouTube, and definitely tune in to Learn TV. If you're watching us live now, you're watching us on Learn TV. This is where we have 24/7 content for developers. So stay tuned for our upcoming talks. But of course, if you have to go get a snack, go take a meeting, do a lunch break, don't worry. We will have all of these talks recorded and available to you in the upcoming days at aka.ms/SWA-learn. All right, y'all. I am super, super excited for our next speaker. Our next speaker loves DevOps. And when she's not writing code or automating something, she spends her free time training for triathlons. Wow, I hope they have a static web app page for their triathlons. Welcome to the show, April Edwards.
Hey, Chloe, how are you?
I am great. Thanks so much for joining us today for SWA Conf. What are you going to be talking to us about today?
So today we're going to talk about DevOps and enabling DevOps with Azure Static Websites, because there are some amazing features baked into the product from day one that will enable everyone to embrace DevOps and get going right away with some CI/CD.
All right, I'm ready to learn about some DevOps. Take it away.
Awesome, Chloe. Thank you. All right, everyone. So as Chloe introduced, I'm April Edwards. I'm a senior cloud advocate here at Microsoft. And I come from this application transformation background. I've moved from ops into development, and I'm hot on DevOps because I have absolutely been through the pain. So we want to focus on how we can kind of enable real life DevOps with Azure Static Web Apps. So if I were to ask each and every one of you, what is DevOps? I would absolutely get a very, very different answer. And that's okay. We all have different backgrounds and different life experiences when it comes to DevOps. So at Microsoft, we have this definition of DevOps. You may have heard it before, but it's always good to iterate again and again. DevOps is the union of people, processes, and technologies to enable continuous delivery of value to end users. Now, I really want to focus on this word value, because it doesn't matter if you're shipping code or some kind of product or feature or anything else. Maybe you're delivering infrastructure to your organization and your end users. If you're not delivering value and they're not consuming it, then what are you actually delivering? Because they're not going to use the product, they're not going to use the feature, and there's no value attached to that. And we need to be delivering value to our organizations, whether it's internal users or maybe external end users and customers in the world. And now DevOps is really this union of these three pillars, because we need people, and people, that's the hardest thing to change. We need buy-in from our organizations from the top all the way down. And changing people and asking them to change how they do their day-to-day work is really tough, especially when they're moving to cloud. But this is a great time to look at the DevOps processes in your organization. Now, when we talk about processes, it's an iterative process. Maybe you're in a waterfall organization and you're looking to go agile, etc., whatever. These processes are continuous iterations, and we're going to kind of talk about them a little bit. But then we have these technology things. Now, a lot of us have probably done it. We've invested a ton of money into technologies that, that will help us. And it doesn't, because we don't have those other two pillars in place. We need the processes, and we need the people, and we need the buy-in. And let's be honest, DevOps isn't magic, and it's hard. It can be really hard, but there's ways to make it easier. And when I work with organizations and customers and they're like, where do we start? What's a good place to start? When you have a new application or a new kind of reason in the organization, maybe you're moving from on-premises into Azure or into the cloud, you need to find those biggest pain points and start there. And you need to iterate over time and develop those processes. It's a constant iteration. And that definition of done is going to change based off of what you're trying to achieve. So it is a lot of hard work, but it's absolutely worth it, because we know organizations that embrace DevOps culture and have the processes and the people buy-in and the tooling in those technologies are high-performing organizations. Think about Uber. Think about Domino's. Think about Netflix. Like, who remembers the old day of going to Blockbuster and renting a VHS tape or 3? But now we have these high-performing DevOps organizations all over the place, and it's because they've embraced these three pillars. Now, when we talk about DevOps, we talk about shifting left. Now, what does shifting left really mean? It means that we do things early and often, and we're ready to fail fast. Failing fast is my favorite phrase to use. We have to embrace failure and learn from it. But doing things early on and being really proactive is super key in shifting left. We've all been on that project where we've shipped some code or done something, and then you have someone in the room that maybe works in the security area or project management or someone else goes, well, hold on, what about this bit? And we've left things to the end. And that can cause a slew of issues. That can cause security breaches. That can cause issues in production. And those are more costly. So by investing that time early on, by shifting left as an organization, we plan, we design, and we involve every part of that organization into what we're delivering. So when we develop what we're doing, we build it and we ship our code. We've had that forethought in the process. So remember, we want to fail fast, but we want to shift left in our organization. So GitHub is a massive investment that Microsoft has made. Now, we know that GitHub is the largest developer community on the planet, with over 50 million developers using that platform. And that's crucial, because we're a firm believer at Microsoft of open source adoption, having the open source mindset, and sharing and collaborating across the globe. And effective collaboration is a massive, massive byproduct of this that we can develop within our teams and across other organizations. And we know that GitHub is this massive thing. So we've invested a lot in it. So as they've published the product Azure Static Web Apps, we've built in some really cool capability. So because we know GitHub is a massive place for developers to work and share code and even put their even private code in repos, we built in some really cool pre-baked CI/CD capability into GitHub Actions. So if your code's already sitting in GitHub Actions, you have a really easy way to get started. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. So anytime you make a code change and it's going to trigger something, right? It's going to trigger your build. It's going to trigger your CI, your continuous integration. And then it's going to push off to your continuous delivery. Now, you can do this in GitHub Actions, and I really want to just say that GitHub Actions isn't just CI/CD, it's a whole workflow management system. So while you can do CI/CD, and that's really cool, you can do so much more with it and attach other workflows to this, but this is baked into the product. So we can connect more things in our project infrastructure, not just, the whole CI/CD piece, but the whole project management system, because the reality is other parts of the organization are involved in our application delivery. And while GitHub is new and shiny, and there's lots of things to do and build, we need to make the system even better. So GitHub has a lot of cool features, but it doesn't have everything baked into it. And we know that, we recognize that. So we have Azure Devops. For those of our customers that are fully vested into Azure Devops as a platform, we've also enabled CI/CD through Azure pipelines using Azure Devops. I apologize, I didn't come up with the naming, but bear with me. So you can use those pipelines. And we know Azure DevOps is a super mature product. You have things like Azure Board, so you can do your planning. And if you need to focus on that workflow and collaboration, Azure DevOps is a great place to be. But we want you to take where your code is sitting, be able to deliver that, and deliver that to your Azure Static website. So enough of talking about slides and all this other stuff. Let's get into an actual demo of how Azure Static Web Apps work. So I'm in the Azure portal now, nothing too fancy. I've already pre-built a couple web apps just in case, I'm doing my demo live and it all breaks. Because if you've ever seen one of my demos before, I always do it live and I like to DevOps on the fly. But I want to create a static web app. So I'm going to go ahead here in the portal, look for a static web app, potentially. There we go. And I'm going to create a brand new static web app. Now, if you haven't done this before, I totally encourage you just to get on with this and have a play, because there's so much cool stuff baked into the product. And if you've been watching the whole conference, you'll have seen so many cool features and capabilities. So I'm just going to build out a little demo here. Now, what's really cool is when you build this from the portal, and if you think of how you've kind of deployed your apps in the past, you've had to have that forethought like, okay, we want to be a high achieving DevOps organization. We want to be more DevOpsy, but how do we do that? We need to look at infrastructure as code. We need to look at automation. Yes. And that takes a lot of forethought, a lot of planning, and maybe a lot of upskilling and learning. But if your code's already sitting in GitHub or Azure DevOps pipelines, we have some capability baked in here. And this is what's really cool. So we're going to take the example that you're using Azure DevOps pipelines right now. We select other here and we build our static web app. So I can literally hit review and create, and it will deploy an Azure Static Web App. Now, when I do that, it's going to deploy this. Now, this was the one I've already pre-baked. It gives me a URL. You can bring your own custom name to the game. That's totally okay. It will deploy your web app in a couple seconds. Probably takes about 10, 15 seconds. Once that's done, we need to get this deployment token from the portal. So we need to take that deployment token, go over into our repo in Azure DevOps. Now, I've already built out my YAML pipeline, but we're going to need this management token. So usually I say copy and paste it, have it ready. Now, when working with YAML, the really cool thing is Static Web Apps is available as a task in the Azure DevOps portal. So you can go in here, add the task, add it into your YAML. Now, again, I've already pre-baked my YAML file. I have the task here for my Azure Static Web App. I can just define where my app location is, API location, and the output location. Now, this piece down here is your token. So remember that management token I just brought up a moment ago. You need to go in and add it as a variable. So here's my token. I've saved it in here. And that's how it's going to give that secure handshake from Azure DevOps pipelines to the Azure portal to your static web app. Now, you're right. This is a manual process, and we want to automate all the things. So I have a cool little PowerShell task here that automates this. This is going to run a PowerShell script here. And what it's going to do is it's going to call that token in the portal, and it's going to inject it into my pipeline because I want to automate everything. I don't want anything manual. So that first step was a bit manual, but this task will automate that for me in the future. Now, I know that there's a task coming down the line. They want to look to automate this a little bit more cleanly. But yeah, so that task is going to do that for me. And the reason why this is really important, because a lot of the organizations that we work with have security requirements. So we've generated this token, but what if that token needs to change? What if we have to change it every week? Some organizations have to change it every single day. This will go and fetch that token, and that saves me having to put it in, because imagine if I had to do that manually, I'd lose that ability. So yeah, so having that ability to automate that, adding in a simple little PowerShell task, boom, we're done. So I'm going to go back to our portal here, look at our static web app. So that's the Azure DevOps pipelines method. Now I want to look at the GitHub method. So cool, I can sign into GitHub from the Azure portal. It authenticates through. Awesome. I just authorize my account. We're good to go. So it sees my GitHub account. All I need to do is set the organization, set my repository. Now, again, my code's already sitting in GitHub, so don't need to go any further. And then I can pick my branch. So if your organization has a multi-branching strategy, etc., you can go and do that there and set that in. Now, this allows you to do a few build presets and all this other good stuff. So as soon as I hit the review and create button, this is going to go spin up my static web app. Cool. But the other thing it's going to do that's even cooler than that, it's going to generate an action for me. So this is the one I've already pre-built. As I built my action, it gives me the static web app workflow file. This is my CI part, and then there's a CD part. So when I say it's already built it for me, I don't have to write any YAML, because I always miss a space. I always miss a space. And as much as I love YAML, I love to hate it sometimes when I miss that space and spend a long time trying to find it. So this generates my workflow file, which is super, super awesome. I don't have to do anything. And as it generates that file, and as it's deploying my static web app in Azure, it's running through this workflow. So we can see this workflow was the initial workflow that I built when I stood up my website. So I have this website here. This is actually the website I built before. I can open it up here. I can browse to it and go, right, I have a really cool website. In the portal, after you deploy that, it also shows your workflow. So again, it shows me that YAML file that it's already done. I can see the GitHub action runs. And this is so important because we have full traceability of our source control when our CI process is running and when our deployment process is running. So that's great. Full traceability from end to end. And if your organization has any kind of compliance requirements and traceability, boom, here you go. So that's all baked in. So we have our website. Now I want to modify our website. And there's a really, really great feature in Static Web Apps that I think is super unique and actually I haven't seen anywhere else. And this is integrated to GitHub. So I want to be a really good developer. I'm going to create a new branch. Okay. And I'm going to call it SWA demo. And in my branch, I want to change some code because we want to make some website changes. Maybe the organization doesn't like my website, or maybe they're saying that, I don't know, my website's too complex or whatever. We just want to update the website. So we've seen my website. Okay, it's cool. But maybe I just want to simplify it. All right. Or maybe we want to test another version of the website. So I'm going to go and just add in some little HTML. I'm going to update my index file. I should put in some really good commit notes, but I'm feeling a bit lazy. I want to commit this directly to the new branch I've just created. So I'm going to do that. It's committed my changes. And if I go into pull request here, it sees I've committed that. Now, again, you can use any other IDE that you prefer, VS Code, Visual Studio, or Code Spaces, and this will do the same thing. But I want to compare my pull request. And yep, I can see all the changes I made. I've taken out a lot of code, some big changes. Yep, I'm totally happy with that. We can just see that there's a lot. So I'm going to create the pull request. Now, remember, this is going to run through my workflow. So it's already set up my workflow. It's already set up my CI. So it runs some checks on my code. So I'm being a really good developer. I've opened up a feature branch. I'm making those changes. And now I've created my PR. And this is automatically running that workflow for me. We can go in the details and we can watch it run. Now, why is this really important? A, it's a unique feature, like number one. Number two, it's a great DevOps practice. Because remember, we want to shift left. So if we want to shift left, we need to think about things like, what kind of testing are we doing? Are we doing linting on our code? Do we want to do unit testing, integration testing, any kind of end-to-end tests? This is going to be great to do right here in the build process. This is against my PR. So again, this is a unique feature. So we're going to let this run. It's running all my checks. I can click into it and see the details of it. It's setting up the job. It's running my actions. It's checking out my code. It's built my code, and it's actually deploying my changes to that static web app now. So hopefully it gets done in a couple seconds. It's all going to be internet and runner dependent. But I could go into my pull request and I can watch it run. This is probably a good time to have a cup of coffee. But actually, as it's run this GitHub Actions bot has just popped up a comment, and I hope you saw that at home. So it's created, the bot's told me it's created a staging site. So with every PR I open and run through my checks, I get a staging site. So this is very similar to deployment slots that you get with Azure Web Apps. So if I click on this, it gives me the same addresses I had before. It has a little #3 at the end. And again, you can bring your own custom domain name. So this is my original website, and it's the name up here. I have a more simplified website, and it just adds a -3 there to just differentiate it from my previous website. So again, much simpler version. Again, you can do anything. But what this has effectively done is we've gone in, we've created a brand new static website. We've deployed it via GitHub because that's where our code sits. We've created a new branch, opened a PR, and we've been given a staging slot, a staging site, so we can test our website against production. We don't have to deploy our code to production. And that is all baked into this. And that is super, super cool. And that's what gets me really, really excited about static web apps. So if I want to make any changes to my website, hopefully not as drastic as that in the near future, but I have that ability to do that, test it. And then you know what? All my checks have passed. It's built my job. It's checked all of it. I can now deploy it and merge that pull request. Now, so when I merge that pull request, it will actually change my production site. So if I were to go back into the portal, after I hit merge pull request, it would deploy it to production, and that staging site would then go away. So I can deploy it, I believe it's 3 staging sites on the free plan. So I could do several pull requests at a time, which is super, super cool. So I'm a massive fan of that feature and a massive fan of static websites, and there's a lot to offer for everyone. So before we get going anywhere else, I just want to cover off one quick thing. There are some amazing resources out there for you. docs.microsoft.com. The product group have put together a great resource, and they put so much documentation. There's some shows on the DevOps Lab on Channel 9 with deploying static web apps with Azure DevOps. And you go to learn.microsoft.com and you can learn all about static web apps and do some really cool training. So thank you, everyone. And back to you, Chloe.
Thank you so much, April. Oh my gosh, you were not kidding about automating all the things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned at the top of your talk that everyone defines DevOps differently. Couldn't agree more. I feel like I get a different answer from everyone. How do you define it when someone asks you that? I know this is kind of like the ultimate question, but in this case, after this talk, I'm thinking a lot of automation, it sounds like.
Yeah, but I think for me, it's driving value, and that's different from everyone. And I've worked for organizations where value is different than maybe a different organization, maybe depending on your industry or what you're delivering. And I think it's that value. And you take any human in IT and in tech and say, right, I run storage. Well, what's their value they're delivering? And when you teach them to automate things, sometimes they can automate something, but they start to automate something. But then what value are they delivering? Storage is a huge deal, right? Storage is the backbone to pretty much everything we do. So for me, it's that value, driving value, because if people don't use what you're doing and they're not happy with it, what's the point of doing it?
Yeah, value, teamwork, automation, yeah. 3 things that I love. We have a question here from Cindy. Once you merge the PR, does it remove the staging site automatically?
Yes, it does. So I didn't do it in the demo, but yes, it does, just because of timings. But yeah, it will remove that staging site. So if you have multiple PRs going in, and if you're on like the free plan, which I think has 3 staging sites, I'd have to double check that. It's in the documentation. So if you have more than 3 PRs going, you'd have to close a PR, get it merged, and all that stuff. But yeah, that will go from the staging site into production and then close it. So it frees up that slot, basically.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today, April. And again, y'all, put all your questions, comments, burning static web app questions in the chat. We'll be answering them along the way. Real quick, we are going to have a little break here with the one and only Brian Clark, a little stretch break. Take it away, Brian.
Hey there, I'm Brian Clark, and you are joining me for a tech stretch. Just to get our eyes off the screen and, get some movement in our bodies. Yeah. So first thing we're going to do, and one thing I want to let you know is that the stretches we're going to go through here, they're going to be available to you as a worksheet later as some digital swag. So that way you can practice these beyond just right now. So feel free to join along with me or just observe. First of all, you're going to want to take a break. You're going to stop, reset. We're going to take a nice deep breath through the nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth. You can do that a couple times. You can choose to keep your eyes closed or open, whatever you feel comfortable with. And that's stretch number 1. Stretch number 2, coming right at you. This one is for your head and for your neck, head and neck. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to nod our head. Yes, yes, I'm the best developer today in this room. Yes, yes. And then sometimes we're going to be like, no, I'm not. No, I am. And that is going to help you get some, mobility in your neck so that it's not just so stiff staring at the screen, right? The other one, this is a personal favorite of mine. This one we're going to call number 3, okay? Thumbs up, right? Arms out perfectly straight across as best you can. It doesn't quite look that way because of the angle here, but straight across. And then you want to bend them back a little bit, okay? And you'll feel a little tension up in the upper chest here, but it's going to get better. You're going to feel the burn. You're going to rotate those thumbs down nice and slow. Ooh, yeah. Oh boy. And then you can rotate them back up. Excellent. You can feel free to do that multiple times. It feels good. Maybe it doesn't feel good. You want to slowly work your way up to doing more, pulling your arms back further. Whatever you feel comfortable with doing, you should do. Next up, we're going to do some shoulder shrugs. We're going to do a little of this. Got to hug the ears a little bit. Maybe thinking you're like, oh, I'm working on this bug. I don't know what's wrong. How do I fix it? I don't know. We're going to stretch out those shoulders. But then while we're also doing that, we're going to roll them back. Yeah. There we go. So up, back, and down. Up, back, and down. Those are some shoulder rolls that'll feel good for your shoulders, okay? Stretch number 5, coming in hot. We're going to put our hands together like this, or you can grab your wrist. You can grab your wrist or put your hands together like this. You can put them up over your head and just rotate. Make sure you do not, get your arms touching your ears. You want to keep separation there. We already hugged our ears during the shoulder rolls. We don't need to do it anymore. And you're just going to keep repeating on either side. Breathe out as you tilt to each side. And there we go. That's 5 stretches, but beyond that, feel free to do what feels right for you. Whatever you feel comfortable with. The key is to get up maybe, get moving, get your eyes off the screen, and feel better. Thank you. Enjoy.
Wow. Thank you so much, Richard Simmons. Brian Clark. I was stretching over here too. I did my Ring Fit Adventure workout this morning, but I needed that extra burst of energy to get me to this final talk. We've learned a lot today. We've had a fire hose of information about static web apps. And if you're just joining us, or maybe you got overwhelmed, you had to take a snack break, don't worry. All of these talks are going to be available at this nifty aka.ms link, aka.ms/SWAconf. I also want to mention these very cool polls that we're doing on Learn TV. If you're not joining us live, you should be. We're on YouTube, of course, but we're also at aka.ms/LearnTV, where we're doing some very telling polls here. We asked our viewers on Learn TV to clear up once and for all how to pronounce it. JSON or JSON. And 64% of you said Jason. And 36% of you said JSON. Interesting. I've been saying it JSON. Okay, well, come and contribute in the poll if you haven't already. And of course, join us at aka.ms/LearnTV to join the conversation. Okay, y'all, I am so excited for this next session. We have 2 folks speaking in this talk that we're about to have. We are going to have Mandy Whaley and Arjun, and they are going to be talking to us today all about end-to-end testing with Playwright. Now, Mandy recently joined Microsoft. She loves building tools that help developers, and she learned how to knit during the pandemic and now has access to a lot of hand-knitted hats. So hit her up if your noggin's feeling cold. And Arjun is a program manager on the Playwright team, where he works closely with Playwright users to get their feedback and shape the product roadmap. Fun fact, he's been using Playwright Automate for boring workflows online, like booking appointments with the DMV. Okay, I'm going there Friday. I need this code. Hit me up.
For sure.
I'm so excited to hear this talk. What are you going to be talking to us about today, y'all?
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. We're excited to be here. We're going to be talking about Playwright and how Playwright works really well with static web apps. All right, are we ready to dive into it, or more questions first?
Let's go for it. We'll take all the questions. If you have any questions for Mandy and Arjun during this talk, put them in the chat and we will make sure to answer them afterwards.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And that text stretch was amazing. I'm still like kind of doing some of those, I think. So great to be here. I'm Mandy Whaley. I'm a product leader in our Azure Developer Experience group. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you about Playwright. Playwright's an open source project we've been working on for automated web UI testing. And I'm even more excited to be here to talk about how Playwright and static web apps work together. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about automated end-to-end testing and why this kind of testing is so valuable right now. Teams are faced with the pressure to ship faster, and they need to do it with high confidence. And sometimes testing can be a bottleneck in this process. There's also a need to take really important user journeys and key scenarios and turn those into code. If you think about something like a shopping cart, select an item, put it in a cart, check out. This is a flow that you never want to have an issue with, that you always want to work. And if you can capture that, replicate it in code, automate the test and test with every release, with every PR, then you know you are not breaking that as you release, and you can release with confidence. The other thing driving automated testing right now is the breadth of browsers and devices and screen sizes and mobile, and the need to be able to make sure that your application is giving the right experience across all of those. But historically, automated testing has been hard. It's been hard to get started. It's been hard to get it right, to write the right test that you need. It's been hard to maintain, and it can be hard to reproduce the failed test, which makes it hard to take action on the test results. And this is what we've been working with in Playwright to really improve. Our goal is to build a solid foundation and tooling for easy to use and reliable automated testing. So what is Playwright? Playwright's an open source library for web developers and testers to write end-to-end tests that run on all modern web browsers. We're open source. Find us on GitHub. Come and interact with the team. We love it when people bring feature requests, bug reports. It's also a great place to check on releases and release notes and know what's coming up with Playwright. Playwright is made for developers. We have consistent APIs across JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Java, and C#. So you can write your test in your favorite language. And we also work really hard on inner loop tools for developers so that the act of writing the test is easy and delightful. And Playwright works across all the modern web browsers, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Safari. And it's really interesting to think that Playwright WebKit works on all operating systems. So you can do things like run Safari test in your Linux-based CI/CD pipeline. Now, the three core ideas behind Playwright are capable, reliable, and easy. Capable automation for modern web platforms. Modern web platforms are changing rapidly and evolving. There's new frameworks, there's new browser features, and the Playwright community and team are really keeping pace with this and making sure that Playwright works with everything you want to develop with. Works great with single page applications, with React, with Vue, even embraces new browser features like geolocation so you can test across a really wide set of scenarios. And then reliable. This is where sometimes the flakiness of tests and the hard to reproduce becomes a barrier. And we're working on this by creating a bidirectional communication between the test script and the browser. And what this does is it lets Playwright listen to events from the browser to know about the state of the underlying page in a very precise manner. And this lets us do things like have auto wait on all of our APIs. So you don't have to build in timeouts and things like that. It lets your test run in a very reproducible and reliable way. And easy to get started, easy to maintain, and easy to actually author and build the test is the goal of what we're driving for. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to welcome my friend Arjun, who's also a product leader in our Playwright group. And he's going to take you through a demo we've been building that shows you how to get started with Playwright and how to use Playwright with static web apps. Arjun?
Thanks, Mandy. So let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen and show you a demo of how Playwright can work on a static web app. Just want to make sure my screen is up there, and there it is. So we are going to go through 3 broad steps in this particular demo. We'll start with setting up Playwright with npm. We'll author a test inside Visual Studio Code, and then we'll actually deploy that test on GitHub Actions as a part of our CI/CD workflow. So let's jump right in. So I have here in front of me a React application, a to-do application built in React, and I've deployed this on Static Web Apps. I can use the VS Code extension for Static Web Apps to actually browse to this website. You can see that it's a basic to-do app here, and we're going to use this for our demo. Let me jump right in back into our editor and show you how we can set up Playwright. So Playwright is an npm dependency that you can add to your package.json file. In this particular example, I've configured our latest stable build of Playwright test, which comes with Playwright and the test runner together. And I've added that as a developer dependency because this is something that we only need in our dev environment and not in production. And you can also install this with npm in your application. Once I have this installation completed, I can actually launch the Playwright CLI in my integrated terminal inside VS Code. So the Playwright CLI, which I launched with npx Playwright, comes with a bunch of commands that can help you get started with Playwright. The first command that I want to highlight is the install command. So what the install command does is that it actually ensures that your system has the 3 browser engines installed that are required for Playwright. These browsers are Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. I already have them installed, and so this ran pretty quickly for me. Now let's get into starting our test creation. Now that we have set up Playwright and the underlying browsers, I'm going to use another command from the Playwright CLI. It's called CodeGen, which will be a way for us to generate Playwright code from user actions. I'm going to launch the CodeGen tool, which brings up these 2 windows in front of me. The window on the left is an empty browser window, and the window on the right is the Playwright CodeGen tool. Let me zoom in a bit. So the Playwright CodeGen tool generates code so that you can actually get started with the Playwright API without having to go through any documentation or like a steep learning curve. It generates the scaffold that's required for a Playwright test. And we can jump into the browser window here to essentially make actions or do actions that we expect to do in our test. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually navigate to our to-do website. When I do that, Playwright CodeGen generates the code for that. So it says page.goto, and it goes to this particular URL. Now, when I have this URL, I can actually play with it in the browser window. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to click on this particular input field, and Playwright shows me a selector for that particular input field. Let's try clicking this one. When I click this field, Playwright generates the page.click with this particular selector, and it picks a user-facing selector. This is not an implementation detail; it's something that the users are actually seeing, and that makes the selector choice more reliable. Notice also that page.click does not actually require any timeouts or sleep conditions. That is because page.click and every other action in Playwright automatically waits for the right conditions. So page.click will automatically wait for this particular element to be visible, to stop animating, and to start receiving click events. That makes your tests a lot easier to write and maintain over time. Let's go back to the browser window and add a few more steps to our test. So I want to create a to-do called write a test. And I've created or CodeGen has created the code snippet for that, which fills the input field and then presses enter. And then I'm going to check this checkbox and click on the clear completed button. What we have here is our first test. It basically tests for our P0 scenario, which is add a to-do and then complete that to-do. And I'm just going to click on the copy button here to bring it to my editor. So let's close these windows and come back here. So in my editor, I'm now going to create a new file. Let's call it E2E because this is an end-to-end test. And I'm going to create a file called todo.spec.ts, which is where we're going to save our test. I could have also chosen JS here if I wanted a JavaScript file, but because Playwright comes with TypeScript out of the box, and I like TypeScript, I'm just going to use TS. I've pasted this file, the test that we just created. Now, because this is TypeScript, I can actually use EX6 import instead of the require block, and I'm just going to switch to that. And I also have type support for the elements that Playwright is bringing together for us here. The first element that Playwright is bringing us or injecting in this particular test is actually an empty web page. And with TypeScript support, I can actually hover over my actions and go through the docs for those actions, go through other options that I might want to consider using as I write more tests. Because this is code, I can play around with it. I can convert this into a function, change the text that I want to write, or any other edit that might be required for the test. For now, I'm just going to stick with what we have and turn over to the terminal so that we can actually run this test. So to run this test locally, I'm going to again use the Playwright CLI tool and use the test command. The test command expects the location or the directory name for the tests, which in this case is E2E. Once I do that, Playwright will spin up a browser worker, and it'll run the test for me, and it says it passed the test in Chromium. We didn't see a UI for this because the test was actually getting executed in a headless manner. To see the UI, we can pass the head flag, which will actually bring up the browser window, navigate to that website, and quickly run through the actions that we put together. This was again in Chromium, and I can specify a different browser if I wanted to, let's say, run it in Firefox. Let's try doing that now. So it spins up Firefox, does the exact same thing. And finally, I can also do this inside WebKit to show you the 3 different browsers that we have available inside Playwright. So what we've been able to do is we've been able to set up Playwright. We've been able to create a simple test, and we've been able to run it locally. Now let's take it a step further and actually deploy it to our CI/CD environment. To do that, I'm going to actually open our GitHub Actions workflow, which was created when I set up this Azure Static Web Apps deployment. So when I did that, Azure Static Web Apps put together a job that runs on GitHub Actions, which builds and deploys my application. And it runs every time I make this happen or make an event on GitHub. For example, I push a new version of my application. It does a bunch of actions. So it checks out my code, and it builds and deploys the website on Azure Static Web Apps. Now, what I want to do is I want to actually run my tests on this deployed website so that I can verify that the tests have or the application is fulfilling our test criteria. To do that, I'm going to actually add this brief snippet here to the same YAML. So what we've done here is exactly similar to what we did locally, right? We're going to install browsers to start with. CI/CD agents don't come with browsers installed, but Playwright can install them for us. We're also going to install system dependencies. CI/CD agents sometimes are not equipped with the system dependencies required to run and launch a browser. And Playwright has a helper CLI command that essentially sets that up. And once I've done that, I can actually get started with running my tests. So I'll start with Chromium, and then Firefox, and then WebKit. And with these 3 commands, I've actually tested my application inside these 3 browsers. I can commit this and push it to GitHub, and this will trigger the run. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to switch to a run that I recently ran this morning, which actually does the exact same thing on actions. So let's zoom into this particular build. So what it did was, it installed the browsers. We can actually zoom into this and see Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit were installed. And then it ran the test. It ran it on Chromium, it ran it on Firefox, and it ran it on WebKit, and all of those tests passed. So in this demo, we actually went through from installing Playwright, setting up Playwright in our NPM project, and installing the 3 browsers. We then switched over to authoring the test, and we used CodeGen to get started. Because that's code, we can always play with the API and make changes as we require, depending on our testing criteria. And we used APIs that had auto wait conditions in them, so we didn't have to worry about sleeping or timeouts or additional sort of wait conditions that often cause a lot of flakiness in automated end-to-end testing. And then we ran those tests locally. We ran the 3 browsers and saw the UI. And then finally pushed that to CI/CD and ran that on our GitHub Actions workflow. In the future, we could have also uploaded artifacts. We could have uploaded artifacts for a screenshot or a video that could have been taken in case the test failed, so that we could actually debug those cases. That brings us to the end of the talk. I want to leave you with a few helpful links to get started and learn more about Playwright. Our website and documentation is at playwright.dev. You can go through our getting started guides and see more on debugging tooling, and network intersection and other sort of capabilities. You can also check us out on GitHub on the Microsoft/Playwright repository. And join our Slack community. We have thousands of developers who are on Slack, who are interacting with each other, learning about best practices from each other, and also interacting with the team. With that, I come to the end of the presentation. I'd love to know if you have any questions or any feedback on this talk.
Amazing. Thanks, y'all, for that wonderful presentation. Our chat has been very active during this. I have a question for you. Tell me about Playwright and how it can help developers building SWA.
Arjun, you want to take? Go for it.
For sure, yeah. So testing is in some ways a superpower to have. If you have great end-to-end tests configured on your application, you can actually move at a much faster pace and ship with a lot more confidence, right? And so if you're building a static web app or any other web application, it could be any web application, anything that runs in a browser. Once you've gotten to a point where your key scenarios are built out, you can actually encode them as code and then make sure that they never regress. Make sure that your application is always fulfilling its basic business requirements. And that makes you ship faster. That's really the premise that we're shooting for, and we've seen multiple teams, speed up their engineering process because of reliable automated end-to-end testing with Playwright.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question here. Well, first of all, we have someone in the chat. Isaac is saying, Playwright is a total game changer for web devs out there. I couldn't agree more. Playwright, all the things. We have a question here that says, my question is, what's the difference between Playwright versus Selenium IDE?
Yeah, Selenium IDE is an amazing tool to actually get started with, Selenium. You can use the Selenium IDE tool to record user actions and generate Selenium code. And we've learned and found inspiration in that when we built out the code gen feature for Playwright. I think one of the key features that we learned from users while thinking about this feature was that users and developers were looking for code. They were looking for code as an output so that they could actually put it inside their Git repositories, have code reviews on it. And so that's been one particular feature that we focused on while building Playwright code gen.
We've got a great question here from David Smith. Is there a way to record the browser as a video while the test runs in --headed mode? That might be an easy way to automate scripted demos, etc.
That's a great idea, and it was one of our most popular feature requests early on, because users actually wanted to see videos of executions that were even happening on CI/CD. You have a headless execution, you don't know what's going on, but if you could actually get a video, you can investigate that failure. And I think with 1.2, so it's been a few months. It's out there, and you can actually check it out. I would recommend going to our website and just searching for video, and you'll find it there.
Amazing. And again, we're always taking your feedback and requests, and make sure to let us know in the chat, reach out and give us all your feature requests. Let us know, give us your questions. Any parting words about Playwright before we wrap up this session, y'all?
I was just going to say thanks for all the great comments and the interaction, and definitely grab those links and go check it out.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Wow, y'all, we covered a lot of content today. I can't believe this is the end. A couple resources to send along your way as we wrap things up here. First of all, if we have any students in the chat, we have this handy dandy link, aka.ms/SWA students. You can sign up for an Azure account without a credit card with a bunch of free resources to get you started. So for our students out there, definitely check that out. And also a reminder that all of these sessions, if you're just tuning in and thinking, oh gosh, I missed it, don't worry, we've got you covered, aka.ms/SWAconf on demand. We will have all of the videos from today's live session posted there over the next couple days. Quick little housekeeping notes here. So the fun doesn't stop here, y'all. Now that Azure Static Web Apps are out of preview and generally available on Azure, there's so much more to talk about. Make sure that tomorrow you join Brian Benz and Burke Holland on the launch space tomorrow, July 1st at 11 p.m. Pacific time. And they'll be talking about recent developments and share new features that are part of this GA release. And the session recordings will be available very, very soon. I'm so excited to learn about all of the awesome static web app things that you're going to be building now that you've learned all of this great information. We do have a couple little things here. Just housekeeping wise, make sure that you give us your feedback. We want to know how to make Azure Static Web Apps better, how to improve them. We want to know what features you want, what is missing. Tell us how we can improve. Reach out. We are built on feedback here. We are here to build tools that developers are wanting to use and excited to use. Let us know how we can help you build the tools that you need to help others out there. We're very excited. All right, y'all. I'm Chloe Condon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, make sure you go to aka.ms/SWAconf on demand for all of these talks after the fact, and we cannot wait to see the amazing things that you build with Azure Static Web Apps. From all of us here on the Azure Cloud Advocacy team and everyone who put this event together, we thank you for joining us live, and make sure that you respond to our polls and chat along with the community in the chat on Learn TV. Have a great day, y'all.